You don't feel loved when you're being yourself. You feel loved when you make yourself easier to love. And you didn't choose that. You learned it. Somewhere along the way, you realized that being too emotional, too honest, too intense, didn't always go well. So you adjusted. You became more patient. More understanding. Less reactive. Less demanding. Easier. You don't ask for too much. You don't create tension. You don't make things complicated. You make things work. And people like that, they stay longer. They get comfortable. They don't feel pressured around you. But there's something you feel, that you never really say. You're tired. Tired of always being the one who understands. The one who adapts. The one who makes everything easier for everyone else. Tired of feeling like love only works when you take up less space. And the strangest part is, it doesn't even feel like a decision anymore. You don't think, should hold this in. You just do. You don't think, I shouldn't say this. You just stay quiet. And slowly, a question starts forming. Not loud. Not clear. But impossible to ignore. If I stopped making myself this easy to love, would anyone still stay? It shows up in small moments. Not in big decisions. Not in obvious ways. Just, in the way you move through things. Like when someone takes longer to reply than usual. Nothing dramatic. Just a delay. But you notice it. And instead of thinking, they're probably busy, something in you shifts. You reread your last message. You check your tone. You wonder if you said too much. And without deciding to, you adjust. Next time, you send less. Shorter messages. Safer ones. Nothing that could feel like too much. Or when you're in a conversation, and you feel something real coming up. A reaction. An opinion. A feeling. And right before it reaches your voice, you stop it. Not completely. Just enough. You soften it. You make it easier to hear. Less intense. Less, you. You say something like, it's fine, really. Even when it's not. And the moment passes. Smooth. No tension. No conflict. Everything stays okay. But something else happens too. You disappear a little. And it's so subtle, that no one notices. Not even you, at first. It just feels like being easy. Like being mature. Like knowing how to handle things. You're the one who understands. The one who doesn't overreact. The one who keeps things balanced. And people trust that. They come to you. They open up. They feel comfortable. Because you don't make things heavy. You don't make things complicated. You don't demand. And for a while, that feels like a good thing. Like you've figured something out. Like you've learned how to be someone people can stay with. But then there are moments, quiet ones, where something doesn't sit right. Like when you're alone after talking to someone, and you replay the conversation. Not because anything went wrong. But because something feels unfinished. Like there was more you could have said. More you felt. More that stayed inside. And you try to ignore it. You tell yourself, it wasn't important. It would have made things weird. It's better this way. And maybe, in that moment, it is easier. But over time, those small moments start to accumulate. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just slowly. You begin to notice that with some people, you're always a little more careful. A little more filtered. A little more managed. You think before you speak. You choose your words more precisely. You avoid certain topics. You hold back certain reactions. And again, it works. The connection stays. There's no friction. No discomfort. But it doesn't feel the same as those rare moments, when you don't have to think about any of that. When you just speak. When you just react. When you just are. Those moments feel lighter. Not because everything is perfect. But because nothing in you is being held back. And the contrast becomes hard to ignore. Because now you've felt both. The ease of being accepted, and the quiet tension of being adjusted. And once you feel that difference, you start noticing it everywhere. In messages you rewrite. In things you don't say. In reactions you tone down. In needs you don't express. You start seeing how often you choose comfort over truth. Not big truths. Just small ones. The kind that don't seem important in the moment. But slowly shape how you show up. You become the version of yourself that doesn't disrupt. That doesn't ask for too much. That doesn't make things harder than they need to be. And people stay. They stay because it's easy. Because you're easy. But there's something underneath that ease. Something you don't always look at directly. A quiet question. If I stopped doing this, if I stopped making everything this easy, would it still feel the same? Would they still stay the same way? Would I still feel this accepted? And that question doesn't come with an answer. Not right away. Because you've been doing this for so long, that it feels natural. Automatic. Like this is just how you are. But then something small breaks the pattern. Maybe you say a little more than usual one day. Maybe you don't soften your reaction. Maybe you let something be seen that you would normally hide. And nothing dramatic happens. Or maybe something does. Maybe the energy shifts. Maybe the other person reacts differently. Maybe there's a pause. And that moment, no matter how small, feels bigger than it actually is. Because it touches something deeper. Something familiar. That old sense that being fully yourself might make things harder. Might make things unstable. Might make someone step back. So you go back. Back to what works. Back to what feels safe. Back to being easy. And again, everything smooths out. Everything feels under control. But now you've seen it. You've seen the moment where you almost didn't adjust. And that changes something. Because now, it's not completely invisible anymore. And once you start seeing it, you can't fully go back to not knowing. You begin to feel the difference in real time. Between what you want to say, and what you allow yourself to say. Between how you feel, and how you present it. And that space, small as it is, starts to grow. Not enough to change everything. Not yet. But enough to create a new question. Not just, will they stay? But something deeper. Something quieter. Something that doesn't go away so easily. What happens to me, when I keep making myself this easy to love? And that question, slowly, begins to change the way you see everything. It didn't start with you trying to be easy. It started with you noticing what made things feel okay. Small things. Almost invisible at the time. Like realizing that certain reactions got a better response than others. Maybe you were excited about something, talking a little louder, a little faster, and someone didn't match that energy. They didn't shut you down. They didn't say anything directly. But something in their face changed. Just slightly. And you felt it. Not as a thought. As a shift. So next time, you toned it down. Not completely. Just enough. Or maybe you asked for something. Attention. Time. Closeness. And the response wasn't rejection. But it wasn't fully there either. It came with hesitation. With a pause. With a feeling that you were asking for more than expected. And your body registered that. Quietly. Without words. This might be too much. So next time, you asked for less. Or you didn't ask at all. And it worked. Things stayed smooth. No tension. No distance. So your system learned something. Not consciously. But clearly. Less is safer. Less keeps things stable. And you carried that. Into other moments. Other people. Other situations. Maybe there were times when expressing how you felt made things heavier than they needed to be. Not because you were wrong. But because the other person didn't know what to do with it. So the atmosphere changed. The conversation slowed. Something became uncomfortable. And even if no one said it directly, you felt responsible for that shift. So next time, you made it lighter. You made it easier. You kept things simple. And again, it worked. Everything flowed better. No awkward silence. No tension. And little by little, these adjustments started to stack. You became someone who could read the room, who could sense what was too much, before it even happened. You noticed tone. Timing. Energy. You learned when to speak, and when to hold back. And people responded well to that. They felt comfortable around you. Things didn't get complicated. You didn't create friction. And that reinforced the pattern. Because every time you adjusted, and things stayed good, your system stored that. This works. This keeps people close. This avoids problems. So it became automatic. Not something you thought about. Something you did. Without noticing. And maybe there were moments where you almost didn't adjust. Where you almost said exactly what you felt. Where you almost asked for what you needed. But something stopped you. Not loudly. Just a small hesitation. A familiar one. And you followed it. Because you already knew the outcome. Or at least, you felt like you did. So over time, being easy stopped being something you tried. It became something you were. Or at least, something that felt like you. You became the person who doesn't complicate things. Who understands. Who adapts. Who doesn't push too hard. And people stayed. They stayed because things were smooth. Because you didn't make things difficult. Because being around you felt light. And that confirmed everything your system had learned. This is how it works. This is how connection stays. This is how you avoid losing people. But there's something important in all of this. Something easy to miss. You didn't learn how to be loved. You learned how to avoid making love difficult. And those are not the same thing. Because one allows you to exist fully. And the other requires you to adjust first. And when that pattern repeats enough, it doesn't feel like something you learned. It feels like a rule, an internal one. Unspoken. but always there. Don't be too much. Don't make it heavy. Don't push. Keep it easy. And you follow it. Not because someone is telling you to, but because it feels familiar. Because it feels safe. Because it has worked before. Even if the situations are different now. Even if the people are different now. The pattern stays. It activates quickly. Almost instantly. Anytime there's something at stake. Anytime you feel like the connection matters. Anytime you sense even the smallest shift. And that's why it shows up today. Not because something is wrong with you. But because something in you learned, very early, how to keep things from breaking. How to keep people from pulling away. How to make connection easier to maintain. But now, you're not in those same moments anymore. You're not in the same situations. And not every connection requires the same version of you. But your system doesn't always know that. It still reacts the same way. Still follows the same patterns. Still assumes the same risks. And that's where things begin to shift. Not by going back. Not by trying to undo everything, but by starting to notice that what once protected the connection might now be limiting you inside it. And once you see that, a new question starts to appear. Not about what you should do differently, but about something more honest. What did I have to give up to become this easy to love? And that question, once it appears, doesn't go away. It doesn't stay in the past. It follows you into your relationships. Quietly. At first, everything feels natural. You meet someone, and you're just yourself. You talk freely. You don't think too much. You feel light. There's no effort in it. No adjustment. Just presence. And that's what makes it feel real. But then, something small shifts. Not something clear. Not something you can point to. Just a change. They reply a little differently. They seem a little more distant one day. Their tone feels slightly off. Nothing obvious. But enough. Enough for your system to notice. And that's when it starts. You don't panic. You don't react dramatically. You adjust. Subtly. You think a little more before you speak. You choose your words more carefully. You hold back certain reactions. You become a little easier again. Not because you decided to. Because it feels necessary. You want things to stay the way they were. Easy. Connected. So you start paying attention. Not just to what they say, but to how they say it. You notice pauses. You notice changes in tone. You notice when they pull back, even slightly. And you respond to that. If they feel distant, you become more understanding. If they seem unsure, you become more stable. If they're inconsistent, you become more patient. You fill the gaps. You keep things from breaking. And again, it works. The connection continues. There's no conflict. No tension. Everything seems fine. But inside, something starts to build. A quiet effort. Because now you're not just being. You're maintaining. You're monitoring. You're adjusting in real time. You start asking yourself things like, was that too much? Should I have said that differently? Did I sound too intense? Am I asking for too much? And the strange part is, you don't question the other person first. You question yourself. So you adapt even more. You become calmer. more flexible, less demanding. Even when something bothers you, even when something feels off, you tell yourself, it's fine. I'm overthinking. It's not a big deal. And maybe, in that moment, it isn't. But over time, those small adjustments don't disappear. They accumulate. You start noticing that you're always the one balancing things. Always the one understanding. Always the one adjusting. And it doesn't feel unfair at first. Because it's familiar. It feels like something you already know how to do. But slowly, you begin to feel something else. Something harder to ignore. A kind of quiet exhaustion. Not from the relationship itself, but from how you're in it. Because you're constantly aware. Constantly adjusting. Constantly making sure everything stays okay. And that takes energy. More than you realize. You might start feeling tired after conversations. Even when nothing went wrong. You might feel like you're giving more than you're receiving. Not in obvious ways. But in attention. In effort. In emotional space. You're holding the connection together. And the more you do that, the less space there is for you inside it. You're present. But not fully expressed. You're there. But not completely seen. Because parts of you are always being filtered. Softened. Adjusted. And then something starts to shift. Not outside. Inside. You begin to notice the imbalance. Not as a complaint. As a feeling. Like something is missing. Like something isn't landing the way it should. And you don't always know what it is. Because technically, everything is working. There's no conflict. No rupture. No clear problem. But there's also something that doesn't feel complete. Something that never quite settles. And that's when the question appears again. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just present. Would this still work, if I stopped making it so easy? And that question is uncomfortable. Because you don't know the answer. You don't know what would happen if you stopped adjusting. If you spoke more directly. If you asked for more. If you showed more of what you actually feel. Maybe nothing would change. Or maybe everything would. And that uncertainty keeps the pattern going. Because adjusting feels safer than risking that shift. So you continue. You keep things smooth. You keep things light. You keep being the version of yourself that makes the relationship easier to maintain. Even if it makes you harder to recognize inside it. And that's the part that slowly becomes impossible to ignore. Not the relationship. Not the other person. But the distance between who you are, and who you're being inside it. And once you feel that distance, even slightly, you can't fully go back. Because now you know it's there. And that changes everything. Not immediately. Not all at once, but enough to create a pause. A moment where you begin to notice that maybe the problem isn't that you're too much. Maybe it's that you've learned to be less, to keep things from falling apart. And that realization, quietly, begins to change the way you see your relationships. At some point, you start noticing it while it's happening. Not later. Not when you're alone thinking about everything. Right there. In the middle of a conversation. You're about to say something, and you pause. Not because you don't know what to say. But because something in you is deciding. You feel the thought, maybe I shouldn't say this. And for the first time, you don't just follow it automatically. You see it. You see the adjustment forming. And that changes something. Because before, it felt like that was just you. Now, it starts to feel like something you do. And that difference matters. Because if it's something you do, it means it's not all of you. It means there's a part of you that exists, before the adjustment. Before the filter. Before the softening. And once you notice that, you start seeing more. You notice how quickly you adapt your tone. How easily you make things lighter. How naturally you avoid tension. Not because you want to hide, but because you're used to protecting the connection. And that's when something becomes clearer. You weren't trying to be someone else. You were trying to make things work. To keep things stable. To avoid that subtle shift. That feeling that something might go wrong. So you learn to smooth things out. To anticipate reactions. To stay one step ahead of discomfort. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It worked. It helped you stay connected. It helped you avoid unnecessary conflict. It helped you move through situations where being fully yourself might have made things harder. But now, you're in a different place. Different people. Different moments. And not every situation requires the same level of adjustment. But your system doesn't always know that. It still reacts the same way, still follows the same pattern. Still assumes the same risks. And that's where awareness becomes important. Not to stop yourself. Not to force change. Just to notice. To create a small space. A pause. Between what you feel, and what you automatically do with it. Because right now, that space is almost invisible. You feel something, and instantly adjust. You think something, and immediately filter it. You react, and soften it before it fully exists. But once you start noticing, that space begins to grow. Just a little. Enough to ask something different. Not, is this right or wrong? Not, should I be more authentic? Just, do I need to adjust right now? And sometimes, the answer is yes. Sometimes the moment calls for flexibility. For patience. For reading the room. But other times, the adjustment isn't about what's happening now. It's about what your system expects might happen. A reaction that hasn't occurred. A rejection that hasn't been expressed. A discomfort that hasn't appeared. And yet, you respond to it anyway. As if it already happened. And those moments matter. Because they show you something important. You're not always reacting to reality. You're reacting to anticipation. To patterns that were learned, and repeated, until they became automatic. But now, you're seeing them. And that changes your position inside the interaction. You're no longer just inside the pattern. You're observing it. Even if only for a second. And that second is enough. Enough to allow something different to exist. Not something big. Not something dramatic. Just something slightly more real. Like letting your natural reaction stay, even if you don't fully express it. Or not immediately softening your tone. Or allowing a pause to exist, without rushing to fix it. These are small shifts. Almost invisible from the outside. But internally, they feel different. Because you're not disappearing as quickly. You're staying a little longer. Present. Aware. And that presence changes the experience. You start feeling when something is actually uncomfortable, and when you're just expecting it to be. You begin to notice which people require constant adjustment, and which ones don't. Where you feel monitored, and where you feel natural. And that distinction becomes clearer over time. Not through analysis. Through experience. You feel it. In your body. In your energy. In how tired you feel after certain interactions. And that tells you something. Not about what you should force, but about what already exists. Where you're able to stay closer to yourself. Without effort. Without constant adjustment. And that shifts your perspective. Because now, it's not just about changing how you behave. It's about recognizing where you don't have to change so much at all. Where being yourself doesn't create tension. Where you don't feel the need to become easier, to be accepted. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Because now, every adjustment becomes visible. Every hesitation becomes noticeable. Every moment where you almost say something, and don't, stands out. Not as a mistake. As a choice. Even if it still feels automatic. And that's where something new begins. Not in forcing yourself to stop adapting. But in slowly allowing yourself to exist, a little more, inside the interaction. Without immediately stepping back. Without immediately adjusting. And over time, that changes the way you experience connection. Less about maintaining it perfectly. More about being in it, without losing yourself in the process. And maybe that's the shift. Not becoming someone different. But recognizing that you were always there. Just slightly hidden, behind the version of you that learned how to make everything easier. Maybe you were never too much. Maybe you just learned to become less, so things wouldn't fall apart. And after a while, that stopped feeling like something you do. It started feeling like who you are. Like this is just how you relate. How you talk. How you connect. But now, you're beginning to see it differently. Not as your personality. As a pattern. Something that formed over time. Something that made sense back then. Because there were moments where being fully yourself didn't land well. Where things got uncomfortable. Where something shifted in a way you didn't understand. And instead of pushing against that, you adapted. You softened. You adjusted. And that helped. It really did. It helped you stay connected. It helped you avoid tension. It helped you move through situations where things could have become harder. So there's nothing wrong with you. Nothing broken. Nothing that needs to be fixed. You didn't fail at being yourself. You learned how to protect connection. And that's not weakness. That's intelligence. Emotional awareness. Sensitivity to people. But now, you're not in those same moments anymore. You're not surrounded by the same conditions. And not every connection requires you to shrink. Not every relationship needs you to make yourself easier, to work. And that's where something begins to shift. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic way. But quietly. Through small moments. Moments where you notice the urge to adjust, and don't follow it immediately. Moments where you feel something, and let it exist for a second longer. Moments where you don't rush to make everything smooth again. At first, those moments feel unfamiliar. Maybe even uncomfortable. Because your system is used to keeping things under control. Used to preventing tension before it even appears. Used to making sure everything stays okay. So when you don't do that, there's a pause. A space where you don't know what will happen next. And that can feel unsettling. But also, that's where something real begins. Because for the first time, you're not just reacting. You're present. You're there in the interaction, not just managing it. And that presence changes things. Not always on the outside, but inside you. You begin to feel the difference between adapting automatically and choosing how you respond. You begin to notice when you feel comfortable and when you feel like you're performing. When you're relaxed and when you're monitoring yourself. And instead of forcing yourself to be more authentic, you start asking something simpler. Something quieter. Do I feel like myself right now? Not perfectly. Not completely. Just enough. And that question becomes a guide. Not a rule. Not something rigid. Just a reference. Something that helps you recognize where you can stay closer to yourself without effort. And where you can't. And that changes how you see your relationships, not in terms of right or wrong, but in terms of space. Where there's room for you, and where there isn't. Where you can exist, without constantly adjusting. And where you slowly disappear, just to keep things working. And that awareness, even if you don't act on it right away, already shifts something. Because now, you're not completely inside the pattern anymore. You can see it. You can feel it. You can recognize when it's happening. And that creates a choice. A small one. But real. To stay, just a little more. To not adjust immediately. To let a little more of you exist in that moment. And over time, that little more becomes something steady. Not fixed. Not rigid. But present. Something that doesn't depend entirely on who's in front of you. Something that feels like you, even when the situation changes. And maybe that's what you've been looking for. Not a perfect version of yourself. Not a version that works in every situation. But a place inside you that stays. Even when things around you shift. Even when the connection feels uncertain. Even when you don't know exactly how the other person will respond. A place where you don't have to become easier, to be allowed to stay. And if any part of this felt familiar, if you've noticed yourself adjusting in ways you never really questioned, you're not alone in this. A lot of people move through the world this way. Quietly. Adapting. Shaping themselves to fit. Trying to keep things from breaking. And most of them never stop to look at it. So if you're starting to see it now, that already changes something. Even if nothing on the outside has changed yet. Because awareness is where it begins. Not change. Not action. Just seeing. And if you want to keep exploring this, in a way that actually connects with real life, you can stay here. There's more to understand. More to notice. And more of you, that doesn't need to be made smaller, to be loved.